Okay, if you've been following the gospel readings over the past 3 weeks or so, you will notice that Archbishop Cranmer has focused his thinking on forgiveness. 2 weeks ago, we saw that forgiveness was rooted in the divine nature. Last week, we saw Jesus implement that forgiveness. Well, this week, we'll take the next step in forgiveness, and we will look at its necessity. Now, as you've heard me say 1,000 times, in order to understand the text, we must understand the context. And the context for this morning's gospel goes all the way back to Matthew 17 and the Transfiguration. Now, I'm not going to relive all of that. I'm just going to give you highlights. We saw the Transfiguration and that amazing revelation of the true nature of who Jesus was to Peter, James, and John. And just as Moses descended from Sinai and found the Jews in unbelief, Jesus descends and he is confronted with the unbelief of the disciples. How? Well, a guy that was demon-possessed approached them, and he couldn't figure out why the apostles not Jesus, couldn't figure out why the apostles could not exorcise this demon. And Jesus' response was, "O ye of little faith, how long am I going to have to put up with you people?" So Jesus immediately encounters the lack of faith of his disciples. And then, after he casts out the demons, as if to warn his disciples, he tells them that, hey, I'm not always going to be here to step in and rescue you guys. And he tells them about his death and his resurrection. And then we see verse 24 through 27, where Jesus this is in 17, where Jesus points out, and we heard this morning in morning prayer, the blessings of being in the kingdom, that we are not confined by worldly constraints. And that brings us to the beginning of Matthew 18, which was one of our readings this morning in morning prayer. In the first part of the chapter, what we see is that in what has just transpired in Jesus' ministry, that he just told them that they are the children of the kingdom, they are free from worldly constraints and entanglements. So, what's the first question they ask Jesus? Is it, how is this possible? Or, will you make this a reality soon? Nope. They ask the most selfish question you can ask. Peter, go ask Jesus. We don't want to ask Jesus. Go ask Jesus. Lord, well, who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? Well done, guys. You've just experienced the miracle of seeing Jesus' true nature in the Transfiguration. You've just seen him demonstrate his sovereignty over demons and the spiritual realm. You've just been told of the undeserved blessings you have by being in the kingdom, and the first thing you ask is, who's going to be the top dog? So, Jesus responds in kind. If you're going to ask a dumb question, I'm going to give you a dumb response. And he humbles them, and he tells them, you want to know who the greatest in the kingdom happens to be? It's those who have childlike faith, just like these little ones here. A faith that trusts completely, totally, wholeheartedly, without reservation or caution. A faith that gives itself completely without hesitation. This is who the greatest in the kingdom is. As a matter of fact, Jesus goes on to say, if someone causes one of these little ones to sin, it would be better if they had killed themselves. It's better to cut off any member of your body that causes you to sin and enter heaven maimed than go to hell whole. That's how important these little ones are to Jesus. Don't ever disparage their faith. Don't ever look down on their faith. Don't ever treat their faith with contempt. Because as Jesus reminds us, it is for these that the Son of Man has come. And he goes on and he says, not only that, but I have come to find that one. I've left the 99 in heaven, if you will, and come to earth for those with that childlike faith. But there's a remedy. Now, all of this precedes what we're going to talk about this morning. We read this morning in this morning's lesson, got Matthew 18:15, where Matthew tells us that Jesus says, "Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother." And we have just experienced this in this church. And we have not gained our brother. They refused to repent. "But if he will not hear thee, take then with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he neglect the church, let him be unto thee as an heathen man and a publican. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say unto you that if two or three shall agree on earth as touching anything that they ask, it shall be done of them, for them, of my Father which is in heaven. For where there are two or three gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." Notice this passage, which sets up our gospel this morning, is talking about discipline in the church leading to forgiveness and repentance. Read this passage carefully. This is critical to understand not only the nature of the church's relationship to her congregation, but also her function in confession, absolution, and forgiveness. So when we read verse 20, what we are reading is Jesus establishing the authority that the church has, not establishing the church, because the church is already established. Go tell it unto the church. Now that brings us to this morning's gospel. Before we get into the text itself, I want to point out something that I've mentioned before. I want to point out the significance of a couple of numbers in Scripture. We know that 3 is the Hebrew number for Trinity, right? Or divinity. 7 is the Hebrew number for perfection or consummation, and 10 is the number for completeness. So when you start mixing these numbers around, you get a very serious theological message that's being communicated. So what are we looking at this morning? We're looking at the number 7, in essence. Exodus 21 tells us, "If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go free." Leviticus 25 extends this principle to what we now know as the year of Jubilee. You have 7 sabbatical years, which adds up to 49, and then the 50th year is the year of Jubilee, where all debts, all sins are forgiven. Slaves are freed. Property is returned to their hereditary owners. It is a year of redemption. You even see this in Matthew's gospel at the very beginning. If you'll notice his genealogy. His genealogy is broken down into 3 sections. 3 sections of 14. Remember what I told you about the rabbinic method of emphasis, repetition. The first section of 14 are 2 sevens in Jesus' genealogy. And then the next is 2 sevens in Jesus' genealogy. And the last is the same, 14, 2 sevens, which adds up to 42, 1 short of the sabbatical year. Now, why do I mention this? Because our text emphasizes that very number. Look at what Jesus says. Well, let's start with Matthew. Matthew goes being a good Jew, and he talks to Jesus, and he says, He asks Jesus if he should forgive his brother, not 3 times, because that would be divine forgiveness. Not 6 times, that would be doubly divine forgiveness. But he asks if he should forgive his brother 7 times. This is going above and beyond. This is forgiving someone to the point of consummation. And what we don't remember, we don't know, is that according to the rabbinic teaching of the time, the Tractate Yoma, that's his name, that was published by Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda, here's a good rabbi's name for you, said the following: if a brother sins against you once, forgive him. A 2nd time, forgive him. A 3rd time, forgive him. But a 4th time, you don't forgive him. Now, this was the rabbinic teaching of the time. Peter would have been familiar with these discussions. To be unforgiving, according to the rabbinic teaching at the time, was not regarded as a grave sin. So when he asked Jesus whether he should forgive a person as many as 7 times, he may have felt that he was attaining the utmost heights of charity. After all, the rabbi said that a person should be forgiven only as many as 3 times. And Peter was more than doubling that. Let me ask you a question. Can you think of anyone who in the last week or month or year you have consciously forgiven for the same offense as many as 7 times? I always thought about bringing a mirror when I preach this sermon.
Does my cat count?
Person. Smart aleck. And what was Jesus' response to Peter? Peter, in my entire lifetime, I've never been as astounded as I am right now with the depth of rabbinic knowledge and theological insight that you have. I am completely gobsmacked. I can't believe that someone from your status, a fisherman, has such amazing insight. As a matter of fact, let me tell you about who is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. Peter, I'm going to give up my seat at the right hand of God, and I'm going to make you the greatest. Is this what he said? Jesus turns around and he said to him, I say not unto thee 7 times, but 70 times 7. Now you'll see some modern translations say 77 times, and that's wrong. Period. Stop. This is a theological concept, and that implies, when you see 77, that implies they are forcing their theological presuppositions on the text. The context is a sabbatical, eschatological meaning. 490 times is what Jesus is telling him. He's telling them this is a sabbatical discussion. So now, Peter's astounded. And we get this straight from Leviticus 25 and Daniel and the 70 weeks. Remember Daniel's 70 weeks? 49 saved 1. That's where you get it. Now, why is this number so significant? Well, let's look at the text. What did Jesus say? He said, therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents. This was in the king's court. This guy was a muckety-muck. And he owed 10,000 talents. Now, he didn't owe him 10,000 song and dance, charade games, spinning plates on a stick, doing karaoke balancing a beach ball on his nose. That's not the type of talent that we're talking about here in the text. Talent is a monetary term, and he owed 10,000 talents, and I'm going to explain to you in just a second why that's so important. But for as much as he had not to pay, he didn't have the money, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife, and his children, and all that they had, and payment to be made. When you go home today, look at Isaiah 50, verse 1. This man put him and his family in this situation. But the servant fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. I want you to keep that phrase in mind, because now I'm going to describe why 10,000 talents is so significant. Do you remember the parable of the day workers? Some would come in the morning. There were those that came the last hour of the day to work. And what did the landowner do? Paid them all the same. He gave them 1 day's wage. A denarius. A denarius was 1 day's wage. Okay? Now, we're talking about 10,000 talents, right? All right. In order to measure up to 1 talent, you needed 6,000 denarius. And in case you're wondering, when you divide 6,000 by the lunar year, which is what the Jews used, that comes out to 16 and a half years for 1 talent. So, if we're looking at 16 and a half years, and we have 10,000 talents, guess how many years this man owed? 165,000 years of labor. That was his debt, measured in time. Now, wait, there's more. So let's put it now into its monetary equivalent. 1 talent, and there were 10,000 of them. 1 talent weighed 75 pounds. How many people here know what the troy weight of gold is today? 12 ounces. Anybody know? Well, I guess nobody here is in Bitcoin or anything. $4,000 an ounce. 12 ounces to a pound. $48,000 for 1 pound. Right? Huh? A talent weighed 75 pounds. So now let's multiply 75 times 48. And what do you come up with? You come up with $3,600,000 for 1 talent. This man owned 10,000 talents. $36 billion as of the 1st century. How many people think they could have paid off that debt? Show of hands. Thank God you've all disqualified yourselves as government workers. Because the government is stupid enough to think that they could pay that off. Okay, so let's look at it from a different perspective. Now, that's 165,000 years only if he saved every single dinar every single day of his life. How many people save every single penny of every single dollar that comes out of their paycheck? Nobody that I know. So now you can add to that. Well, if that's not enough, let's look at this in one more way. If you go by the life expectancy, we're talking about 165,000 years. If you talk about the life expectancy of your average Palestinian, you're talking about somebody 55 years old. So let's divide 165,000 years by 55. And in order to pay this debt, this man would have had to have lived 3,000 lifetimes. Now, if you go by today's life expectancy of 80, it would be 2050. But in any case, no matter how you understand this, the average life expectancy or the monetary value, the enormity of the debt is what is being focused on, and the debt is to God. The point is, no matter how you calculate it, monetarily or chronologically, the debt was unpayable. Do you understand that? Unpayable. I use these examples simply to highlight the force of our sin and our debt to God. It isn't to be focusing on the literal aspect of these things. It's to point out that there's nothing we can do. So we come to Matthew 25, and the servant of the king and his family are about to be sold into slavery, into prison, until he pays off all of his debt. Imagine that. The servant doesn't deny that he owes the huge amount of debt. Neither does he try to explain how he got into this terrible predicament. Since the servant was unable to pay the king was going to have to take him, his wife, and his children, sell him into slavery, sell his goods on the open market to pay as much of it as possible. But hearing that, the man falls on his knees and he begs. The servant fell down and worshipped him, saying, "Lord, have patience with me. I will pay thee all." You want to run that through your hearing one more time? $48,000 an ounce. $3.6 million for talent. $36 billion total in debt. 165,000 years, 3,000 lifetimes. And oh, by the way, I can pay that off. And then the king has compassion. From the depths of his heart, he felt pity from the core of his being, and he released the servant from the debt. And the word that is used here to release is the cognate of the word that is used for redemption. He saved that man. And then the very servant to whom such marvelous mercy had been shown upon his departure from the king's presence happens to meet a fellow servant who owes him 100 dinars. 100. 1 day's wage, 100 times, 3.5 months. 3.5 months. So what do you think this man who received such great gracious forgiveness and redemption does? You think he treats his fellow servant kindly? Laid his hands on him, took him by the throat, saying, "Pay me what you owe me." Notice he didn't even talk to him first. He grabbed him by the throat. That was his first action, to choke this man. "Pay me what you owe." And the reaction of the fellow servants was almost identical to that of the first servant. This guy got down on his knees and he begged him. He begged him. 4 months. "Please, forgive me, I will pay thee all." Jesus here in this parable is endeavoring to substitute for the hard and fast legalism of Judaism of his time, a religion whose center and soul was active love and forgiveness. Those who knew him best and had been with him most were slow to understand the vast difference between the new teaching he brought and the old system of rules under which they had lived. And the word "forgive" that is used in verse 32, to release him, to forgive him. You should have forgiven as I have forgiven, is a legal term. It has the force of a legal declaration. You are no longer under indictment. Jesus then tells him that his forgiveness should be appropriate, the servant, that his forgiveness should be appropriate to the debt incurred. Think about that. The debt incurred. Not from the brother, but the debt we incurred in relation to God. And his point was that our forgiveness of others should be unlimited. This mercy isn't, nor can it be bought. The forgiveness of sins on the part of God is a free gift of boundless measure. Do you understand what you are being forgiven? Do you understand the force of the debt you owe God? That is represented by the immense size of the servant's debt. He could never pay, could never have paid it. And even though he did say so boastfully and arrogantly, to promise to pay it all. The nature of this type of forgiveness and the ability to offer it comes from the true character of the individual. The only way one can forgive in this manner is if they have already experienced the regeneration of their soul, the pain of the cross, the sweetness of God's redemption, and the mercy and forgiveness of Christ. Forgiveness and mercy in our relations with each other are not matters of choice, but of necessity. We never have the right to refuse forgiveness. But in view of the infinite degree of mercy we have all received from God, we have the duty of extending it. Imagine the normal operation of any of our days. We're busy, thronged with people, constant interaction, at a store, the mechanic, work, restaurants, etc. Now, think of the affronts that we daily receive and, dare I say, perpetrate. The pressure of competition, the unintended injuries, unconscious slights, or maybe they're intended. These things, endlessly repeated, make an enormous drain on a person's fount of goodwill, their evenness of disposition, even their readiness to forgive. Human actions are to be truly seen and weighed only when we set them against a divine background. And you've heard me say this before, but Calvin said man is never truly affected by his own sinfulness until he is confronted with God's holiness and his forgiveness in this passage. You want to know why we don't have the right to hold a grudge? $36 billion, 165,000 years, 3,000 lifetimes. That's what we owe. The effect of this mercy of God toward man ought to be to arouse in us a magnanimous, merciful spirit to our fellow man. The sin of the unmerciful spirit appears to particularly be shameful when it is contrasted with the mercy shown to the one committing it by his fellows. And make no mistake, there are consequences. Jesus says in verse 34, and in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. That's the ESV. For God is said to be angry when he punishes sinners. Psalm 5:5-8. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Thou shalt destroy them that speak lessing. The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man. But as for me, I will come into thy house in the multitude of thy mercy. And in thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face. Psalm 7:11, God judgeth the righteous, and God is angry with the wicked every day. St. Anselm told us that we have the Curdeus Homo, the God-man. An infinite sacrifice was required for sin because the sin was committed against an infinite, holy, and righteous God. As I've gone through this material in closing, I hope you picked up on a very important element of our treatment. Everything that we've discussed is in view of the transfiguration, the revelation of who Christ truly is in his essence. Everything following Matthew 17 is in that context. The revelation of the Son of God in his glory is the backdrop for the last 11 chapters of the Gospel of Matthew. Everything, all the topics, all the theology, all the parables are founded on Christ's revealing who he is in his essence to his disciples in the transfiguration, and that includes forgiveness. And now reflect on what we've just said in that context. Our debt incurred, our inability to pay the ransom price for our sin, and the amazing act of Jesus' payment and its cost. There are 3 points I want to end with. Number one, there is a judgment coming. Jesus did not pass over that teaching. He spoke of forgiveness, but he also spoke clearly what happened to the wretched man in his story. He was cast into prison until he should pay back all he owed. And in Matthew 5:26, it states that one remains in prison until every last penny is paid back. Every last penny. There is no purgatory, folks. There's no second chance. 36 billion, 165,000 years, 3,000 lifetimes make our debt unpayable, unredeemable by us. That judgment stands over every one of us who has not experienced God's forgiveness through Christ. The second is there is forgiveness. This is the big but. There is forgiveness. God does forgive. God sent Christ to be the basis for that forgiveness. And lastly, the only sure proof of a person's having received God's forgiveness through faith in Jesus is a transformed heart and a transformed life. You want somebody to immediately know without anything else that you're a Christian? Forgive somebody that has deeply wounded you. Remember what Jesus said. They will know you by your love for one another. How do we get that down into the practical area of our lives so that we actually begin to treat others as we have been treated? It's by standing before the thrice holy God, seeing ourselves as the vile sinners we are, vile and yet forgiven through the death of God's own beloved Son. That awareness should humble us so that we have simply no